Thank you, President, and I'll rise to speak briefly on this motion. And I must say I was just reminded of how beautiful horses are and how wonderful it is to see them run. And I was reminded because across the river from our property is actually one of those places that that Ms. Shing spoke about, a place where retired horses actually do go. And watching them race up the hill in the morning, racing against each other, it was just their natural, it was such a natural state of being, and it was so beautiful. And so we know that these horses, they love to run, and it is a natural state of being. So why do we need a whip? Why do we need tongue ties? And I know in 2018, Reason, our party and myself, we spoke considerably about the use of tongue ties, and I'm pleased, and that was back in 2018, and we know that a tongue tie is a strap that immobilises a horse's tongue, attaching it to the lower jaw, and is believed to prevent airway obstruction while racing, although there's not a lot of science around that. And in fact, there's now a pilot going on about not using ties in the racing industry. We've seen things like nylon ties be prohibited in the racing industry, and I think right now we're actually probably seeing the end of the use of ties in the racing industry in Australia, and that is good because they are cruel. Now, whipping a horse, whipping anything, any animal, anything is illegal in most circumstances, except for this small exception to that rule. And that is that a jockey in a thoroughbred race can strike the horse up to 5 times during the race, and pretty much every second stride in that last 100 metres. Jockeys have been fined for over-whipping many times. In fact, in the last 2 Melbourne Cups, jockeys were fined for over-whipping. Now, I don't think that fine really stopped the celebrations. I don't think that fine really dug in very deep into the prize money that they had received or the earnings that the owners of those horses had received. So, as a rule, those fines don't really act as a deterrent. In 2020, Racing Victoria conceded that the current whipping rules weren't really appropriate and that we needed to reform. So I think Mr Meddick's motion here actually has extraordinarily widespread support. In fact, it's hard to find people who don't seem to agree with it. In fact, in Victoria, they attempted to trial whip-free. And one assumes if those horses loved racing as much as they do, and they love running as much as we see as much as I could see across the river from my place, then they wouldn't need a whip to continue them racing. And if nobody used whips, if it was only hands and feet in the racing, it would be a level playing field, as it were, a level racing field, as it were. So it seems anachronistic in the 21st century that we provide an exception to whip an animal. If we saw someone whipping an animal in our streets, we would be outraged. If we saw an animal being whipped on a farm, we would be outraged. But yet, we have this exemption for thoroughbred horse racing. Now, we know that the community is behind us, and that includes the punters. They don't want to see a whip. They don't, and I think, I think Mr Meddick's, it's a very modest motion. It's saying let's renew this conversation about the use of whips. Let's trial something different. And it seems Racing Victoria is behind this. The community is behind this. I'd even probably say that the vast majority of the industry is behind this. we are in a very, I suppose, a very different time than, when thoroughbred racing first started. We have seen the gradual removal of whip usage. We've seen the gradual decline of it. We've seen the regulations be strengthened. So I think Mr Medic is on the right course. I think you've got the RSPCA behind him. You've got the community behind him. I would hope to see not only Racing Victoria but Racing Australia get behind this. I would be interested to hear jockeys getting behind this as well, because they talk about jockey safety and all right, I've never been a jockey, but I don't understand how that jockey safety is, that whip that they suggest doesn't hurt the animal, that they suggest is not painful at all, that how does that whip actually keep them safe, and particularly when we are really talking about the limit of it to the last 100 metres of a race. So I wish Mr Medic well in this. I think, as I say, it's a very modest. It's a very modest motion, and we know where the Animal Justice Party stands on racing. There's been no secret in that. But I think when you're in this place, it is about looking, not letting the perfect get in the way of the good, and I think this is one of those motions that does that.